Bethany Decker. Virginia natives Bethany Littlejohn and Emil Decker met while they were in college. Emil's plan was to go into the Army, and Bethany was majoring in environmental change at George Mason University. The two dated for 3 years, and once discovering she was pregnant, they married. But all was not good for Bethany. She struggled with being a 20-year-old mother, and Emil leaving for the Army did not help her struggle. Being a single mother took its toll on Bethany's mental health, causing her to beg her mother to take custody of her son, and she agreed. Bethany continued on, working nights at a restaurant and going to school. Her plan was to stabilize her life and take her son back. Emil returned a few weeks later from his deployment, taking Bethany to Hawaii and trying to fight for his family. The young couple returned on January 28, 2011. The next day they had a family dinner with her mother and grandparents. She suddenly left the event, never to be seen again. She did not show up at the airport when her husband returned to where he was stationed. It would not come out until later, but Bethany was seeing a co-worker named Ronald Roldnan while her husband was deployed. It's unclear if Emil knew his wife was cheating on him or Ronald's view of Bethany's marriage. Death and pain surrounds Roldan. One of his kids suddenly passed away while in his care, believed to possibly be a victim of SIDS. Bethany and her mother strongly believed that he had been violent to both Bethany and her son Kai. Kai had 2 black eyes for his first birthday. Brittany blamed it on someone else, but her parents noticed that Kai responded with fear whenever Ronald was around. Friends and family both begged Bethany to leave him many times. She told them that the relationship had fizzled, but he refused to leave her apartment. Bethany called her mother in a panic one day, telling her mother that Ronald had called the daycare pretending to be the child's father, Emil. It worried them enough that a code word was developed for the daycare to know if Ronald was calling again. The timeline is all over the place, and while there is no question that Bethany was 5 months pregnant when she went missing, it's not clear which man is the father or who thought they were the father. What is known is that 21-year-old Bethany had been seeing Ronald for a while, and he was extremely controlling. She was not allowed to go anywhere without clearing it with him first, so it's impossible not to consider what his response was to her going on vacation with her husband to try to work their marriage out, and how he might have viewed that situation, as these two were still clearly together also. Before abruptly leaving her grandparents' home in Columbia, Maryland, she and Emil seemed to be doing pretty well that night. The evening was described as happy, and so her leaving abruptly was puzzling to everyone involved. The last word of what happened to her that evening was when she called to pick up a shift, and then she didn't show up. Roland was with her that evening and told the police that he had no idea where she went. Her car was still in the apartment complex where Roland lived, and the car key was found inside the apartment. He would not be the one to report her missing, however. That would be her family, who were alarmed after not hearing from her for 3 weeks. She was reported missing on February 19, 2011. Roland would go on to say that he left the apartment and went to an ATM, meeting up with his ex-girlfriend and their 2 children. The ex, Danielle Oliveira, came over to drop the kids off. She asked Roland where Bethany was that night, and Roland said she left. But when Oliveira returned to pick up the children, she again asked where Bethany was. His referral to say was leaving her uneasy, and that is why she approached the police later. He hedged his answers and would not provide any real explanation about where she was that evening. Investigators pulled all of the electronics from Ronald's home, hoping to find some sort of clue as to where Bethany went, but to no avail. Her brother Kyle Littlejohn would describe her as a loving character who was always upbeat and kind to others. She was especially into caring for the environment around her. Her case quickly went cold, well, lukewarm, as someone was posting on Facebook as if they were Bethany in February of 2011, probably trying to convince others that she left of her own accord. The person would contact Bethany's husband and one of her friends. However, he or she was not very convincing, as they were unable to recount anything that happened on the trip the two had taken to Hawaii or correctly answer any other personal questions. Authorities eventually obtained records from Facebook through a search warrant. They were able to prove it was someone at the IP address that Ronald was at who was accessing her Facebook account. After Bethany's disappearance, Ronald moved on to a waitress named April Snyder. They hadn't been dating long and they weren't serious in April of 2014 when they got into an argument about whether or not April was cheating on him. According to the police, the fight ended by Ronald throwing her belongings out on the front lawn and spitting in her face. He grabbed her arm, flinging her down the stairs. Luckily, she was not seriously hurt, and he managed to get the charges dropped by paying her $2,500, leaving him free to continue violently accosting other women. He moved on to a job in Manassas, Virginia, and started dating a coworker there, a woman named Vicki Willoughby. She had 3 kids, and it wasn't a serious relationship. Vicky agreed to let him stay with her for a couple of months in a spare room in her home until he could get on his feet, as he was having some financial problems. That is, until a friend found information about Bethany's case, which stated that Ronald was the last person to see her alive. This terrified Vicky, who immediately confronted him. His response was over the top and only served to scare her more. Just as he had done with the other women, he got more and more controlling. He slowly began isolating Vicky from her friends and family. By the end, she was no longer allowed to text, email, or call anyone. He started to threaten those who mattered to her, bragging that he could make people disappear. Frightened for her life, Vicky decided she had to get away. She quit her job and decided to move into a house she still owned in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Unfortunately, Ronald got wind of the plan and announced he would be going with her, unwilling to take no for an answer and becoming violent. He went along with Vicky as she moved, and she felt trapped. She began keeping track of what she called his episodes. Episode 8 had him grabbing her by the hair and the back of her head and pulling her across the room until he reached a counter where he slammed her head against it, only stopping when she fell to the floor. He threatened to kill her many times, and she believed him. She was too terrified to report him or to leave. She got in the habit of unlocking all the doors in the home every morning, just in case she had to run to safety quickly. She obtained 2 revolvers, hoping they would keep her safe. She hid them in random changing locations. On November 11, 2014, one was under the dog bed and the other underneath the living room chair. That night, Ronald decided to go to bed, leaving Vicky with her laptop in the living room. He apparently decided against leaving her any means of communication, however, and he abruptly got back up and took her phone and laptop, eventually choosing to pull her hair, hit her, and bite her. She was terrified. He kept punching her in the neck until she blacked out. Instead of choking her, he was actually punching it, and at one point she heard a snapping sound and her neck was broken. Still, he kept pounding. As they rolled around the room, Vicky thought her prayers were answered. She eventually managed to grab the revolver from beneath the chair with her left hand. There was a struggle, and she's right-handed, so it was awkward. By this time, she was on the floor and he was on top of her, and she did manage to shoot twice, even though she was essentially holding the gun backwards. Both bullets hit him too, one above the heart and one in the stomach. Shockingly, his anger was so great that it didn't slow him down, though. It only made him angrier. He pulled the gun from her hand and fired the remaining 3 bullets at her. One of those 3 bullets still resides inside her head. She said she eventually gave up and at that moment wanted to die, but amazingly was still alive and still being hit by Ronald. Eventually, he walked away to assess his own injuries, looking at them in the mirror. While he did this, Vicky managed to drag herself to the kitchen, grab a knife, and get out the door. It was nearly 2 a.m. and Vicky was running for her life outside, topless, pounding on doors, begging for help. At the 3rd house she managed to go to, a man angrily responded that he had called the police, falsely thinking he was about to become a victim of a home invasion. He was able to finally see her outside, and once he saw her condition, he quickly pulled her inside to safety. Roldan didn't even try to run. He was still inside Vicky's home when the police arrived. He surrendered quietly, and both ended up in the hospital. Willoughby spent 5 brutal, painful days in ICU fighting for her life. Although she lived, she was seriously injured in the shooting, and she lost her right eye, as well as they were unable to remove one of the bullets from her head. In 2015, the then 34-year-old waiter was sentenced to a minimum of 6 years and a maximum of 8 years and 3 months behind bars. This plea bargain felt like a slap in the face to Vicky, who will forever remain permanently scarred both physically and mentally. She would call his sentence a backroom deal and a small slap on the wrist. However, back in Virginia, this was seen as a possible break in that case. Police have all along suspected that Ronald's involvement in Bethany's disappearance was bigger than he was letting on. Authorities traveled to where Roldan was in jail several times, but he refused to speak to them and he just met their questions with obscenities. However, on Monday, July 24, 2021, authorities announced a major development in the case. Ronald Roldnan was being transported to Virginia from North Carolina to face charges of abduction. It's not clear what prompted this arrest now. They announced that the deputies went to North Carolina to take him into custody, and they would be returning him to Virginia to charge him with the crime. For the sake of Bethany's family, it will hopefully result in the location of her body and some form of closure. Bethany has been missing for 10 years and would be 31 if she was alive. The child she was carrying at the time would be 9 now. Thanks for watching and listening. Take care of yourselves and each other.